since I've done a con. It's so nice to be out. It's so nice to see people in costume. I love also, I know that being uncomfortable is part of the gag. I just love it when I see people being uncomfortable. Because it's really a key part of the mission. And every time I see someone yanking on something that's biting it, I'm like, yeah, I've been there. Dudes, it's been really fascinating. I did not expect at this point in my career to be a full-time YouTuber, but life has never been better. Seriously, untested, we're putting out 5 videos a week now, and I've stopped pretty much developing for television because I'm in my shop 50 hours a week, and I'm happier than I've ever been. The tested team is firing on all cylinders. We're heading off tomorrow to London to do some coverage of a couple of giant franchises that you all know and love that will show up on the channel later this year. I have adult twin boys, thing 1 and thing 2. They are 24 and they're in a great place. And when your kids are in a great place, everything else seems pretty freaking cool. So we have people lined up here for questions, and I'm just going to spend this whole 40 plus minutes answering your guys' questions, so step on up. Hello.
Was there ever an experiment you didn't enjoy doing or just completely failed for no reason?
Failed? Well, so both of those things happened. I mean, there was, like, so we did Whirlpool of Death, which is really fun. But I didn't enjoy vomiting into the pool that I was in and using for experiments. That was not fun. So that wasn't joyful. And in fact, it doesn't even show up on the episode. It was one of those days where it was like, you know when 40 degrees is like a weirdly cold 40 degrees? And it's pissing rain. And we're on like 16-foot high scaffolding, so it's dangerous and super uncomfortable, and we're in this abandoned military base. And abandoned is a relative term. And it was really maybe one of the most uncomfortable days. But I'm so happy with what we came out with. Actually, this is a really interesting one, because one of my favorite joys on the show was making stuff with Jamie. I didn't like anything else about Jamie, but making stuff was amazing. And so we did the experiment, and the dark is coming, and I throw up, and we get the results we wanted. It's great. Now, I go back to a car to nap, because I'm feeling really crappy. So I'm like napping in the car, and they get their last shots, and I wake up about 30 minutes later, and now it's dark. But I can see that everyone's starting to pack up. And it's like 9 o'clock at night, so this is not necessarily an easy situation. We've got this 16-foot tall tank full of water, it's got scaffolding all around it, and what I can see is that they've removed all the scaffolding, but it's time to lift this thing up with a forklift. And if you've ever operated heavy machinery, you don't want to lift a 16-foot tall, 8-foot diameter tank in a forklift without a spotter. And so I stumble out of the car, sort of half asleep, and I see what's going on, and Jamie and I make eye contact, and I just like point, and he nods. And so I just start giving directions and giving him, and we move this big dangerous thing like a dance. And then he puts it down, and it's like the kind of thing that only the two of us could do with each other. And it was deeply pleasurable, despite it being super uncomfortable. Thank you.
3D artist, and you inspired a lot of digital artists for generations. As the godfather of Reroll, you have seen the evolution of practical to CGI. What's your take on old school techniques used in modern CGI? Do you think they still have kick into them, or are you just fearing a world where everything is just, all the effects are just painstakingly miniatures?
No. It's a wonderful moment right now. The whole reason CG worked in the first place was because of the brilliance of Rebel Macro and Dennis Muren and what those guys were doing at ILM. It's all really beautifully covered in the Disney series Light and Magic. But the other reason that CG came ascendant was because of Moore's Law, because of processing cycles. The computers just kept on getting more and more powerful. And that meant that making movies got cheaper, and that meant that rendering stuff got cheaper, and it keeps doing that. But what's happening now is that processing cycles are also one of the reasons that 3D printing is so easy to do. and CNC machining is so much easier to do. And so now John Knoll, who's the creative director of Lucasfilm and the effects director on episodes 1, 2, and I think 3, and now on Mando, is literally building motion control rigs for hundreds of dollars in his literal garage. And that's because of the same revolution in processing cycles and smallening of computing power. So what's great is that John Favreau, along with people like James Cameron and Guillermo del Toro and J.J. Abrams, they love effects. They love the practical. I can figure out what's going on. There we go. They love the practical effects. It's a George Burns reference. Only the old people get the joke. They love them, but they can't afford them. And so I still think the practical effects look better than anything. The two best-looking science fiction movies in history are Blade Runner and 2001. Yes. There's not a composite shot in any of those films. In 2001, they would shoot a moon in the right position, and then they'd go build the Starliner, and then they'd go they would have that film that they shot the moon on unexposed, undeveloped, and then they'd go and reshoot on the same piece of film for the ship. And so it means that everything that you see on film is a first generation. And that's why Blade Runner also looks great. And filmmakers know that this is the best way to make a movie. It's also, unfortunately, the most expensive. So I think that what John Knoll is doing right now is initiating a total sea change. And my friends who work in animatronics, like at Legacy Effects and Spectral Motion, they're also 3D printing mechs in ways that are making animatronics so much faster to initiate. And I think all of that technology is going to trickle down to us mortals too. You know, those files will escape. We'll learn how to make a nice trunnion so a mouth mechanism for your severed head prop looks awesome. I'm trying to get a severed head prop of myself that moves. Thank you for the question. Hello, I love your costume. We met yesterday.
Yeah, we did. I have a question about YouTube because I'm really bad at it, but I want to start a cosplay channel. How do you break up your huge builds that take about 9 million hours into videos that you can post weekly or more than weekly?
Oh man, it's so good that I don't have to be in charge of that specific thing. Seriously, like, I have gotten to do it on the easy settings. I had a business partner for a long time that tested. Norm Chen and Joey Famelli came with Tested, and they're both geniuses. They're amazing. We have a new editor shooter, Josh Self, who's also incredible. But I think practically the best advice I could give you is the videos themselves are characters. They are characters as much as the character that you're infusing when you put on a costume. And you kind of have to figure out what that character is. Tested has developed and changed over the years, and it's changed because of me, but it's also changed because of different members of the team choosing to do different things with the videos. We had an editor, Gunther, who loved to make fun of me for making bandsaw. I didn't wear the bandsaw noises shirt, but I'd always be leaving frame and you'd hear bandsaw noises, so we put it as a subtitle. And it became this great running joke, and I love that. And that's part of the character of the videos, and also the character that he's bringing to the edit. So my best piece of advice would be that it is still storytelling like any other story, and the trick is it interesting when you're watching it? So sometimes we'll time-lapse long builds, and other times we take an hour and a half of me like sewing, and we'll put it up for Tested Premium members. I actually know we put up all 5+ hours of the tinfoil ball making. And we put it up for premium members with all the music I was listening to and all the singing along I was doing with like Paul Simon and Joni Mitchell. And 87 people have watched all 5 hours. Okay, thank you for the question, man.
My question borders along the lines of a YouTube video. Actually, I really love the Love Letter to Cosplay TED Talk that you did a couple years back. My question is kind of on that same lines. You walk the floor of most cons incognito and you build these elaborate costumes. What is your dream costume to make?
I still really really want to do the radish spirit from Spirited Away. And then I just want to ride the elevator all day long. I want to see how many Chihiros come in the radish spirit. I was in London last October, and luckily, my time there crossed over with being able to see the Royal Shakespeare Company's production of My Neighbor Totoro. And it's going to eventually tour the whole world, I'm sure of it, because Jim Henson's shop built the Totoros, and I'm getting chills of telling you about this. I watched this with Norm and Joey, both who have toddlers. And Norm was like, Joey, when was the last time you saw Totoro? Joey was like, Thursday. Norm was like, Sunday. And the lights come up after the first act, and all three of us were weeping. Now, of 14, you know the first time you're going to see Totoro, right? It's Meg sleeping on his tummy. And when it happens on stage, it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. When he opens his mouth, an entire puppeteer is the tongue. It's so magical. What was the question?
Featuring costume.
Oh, yes. It's so many Miyazaki characters. So many. The Radish Spirit is definitely one of them. I also have I've always wanted a xenomorph costume. Years ago, I commissioned these young men to make one. I found them on Etsy, and it was very reasonably priced. It was beautifully made out of latex, and wearing it was torture. And worse torture than most. And I was at Mood Fabric, where all the fabric in the world is in New York, and I found this shiny, black, super stretchy fabric. So it looks wet, and what I want to do is I want to sew a xenomorph 100%. And have it look greasy and gross. So that's another long-term goal. I'm still getting used to what my periodicity is on the builds on YouTube. For the last few months, it's been a lot of small builds, and I'm suffering because of it. Like I need like every other quarter, I need something that takes me a month to build. I want something big and fat to sink my teeth into. Excellent. For that question.
Hello. So I'm going to start by saying I really enjoy watching your videos about ADHD. I actually have ADHD symptomology, and I really want to be an artist and professional cosplayer, but I struggle with staying focused, getting started and staying focused for more than 30 seconds. And like basically my digital art, my iPad art app is basically full of like half-drawn under sketches. What advice do you have?
I love that question. I suspect there is a fair amount of neurodivergence in this crowd. Beautiful sound. It is a tough road, and so I didn't actually, and I've talked about this on the channel, I didn't really confront how much ADHD was going on in here until I got to spend a week driving through the Southwest last year with my son playing one. And I was like, oh my God, you listen to the middle of songs and then move on to the next one? I do too! And it was very affirming and also very illuminating and gave me a lot of insight into him. And one of the things I found was a wonderful podcast called ADHD Big Brother. And this is a terrific podcast because he's very positivist. He talks really openly about mechanisms that we can use. He talks about medication. I'm a big believer in medication for ADHD, but also a lot of the ways in which medication is administered is really tough. For my son, the doctor gave him one dosage of Adderall and didn't adjust it for months, and the Adderall made my son hangry and disgusted by food at the same time. It was actually, that's not me, it was actually pretty traumatic. And so I would recommend medication, but also working very granularly with a doctor to monitor how it's working for you on a day-by-day basis to really adjust the amounts.
I actually was on meds, but they made me aggressive.
Yeah, I mean, look, all meds for neurodivergence are always, they're always a balancing act. There are all sorts of positive effects and there are all sorts of negative effects too. I say this as, I'm not a professional in this regard. I'm not speaking in a professional capacity, but I do think it also behooves us to talk about our neurodivergence and our responses to things and our anxieties. Like it's an important conversation to have. The other one is keep talking about it. I really appreciate you standing up in front of a crowd and talking about it. That's a big deal. And that is actually also a way in which we can find our communities that can help us stay focused. Because collaborating with others is a fantastic way to do it. And there is so much collaboration here. I love it when a family comes up and only one person's in costume, but you know that this whole unit produced the costume in front of you. Like, that is I'm so here for that kind of thing. I've been lucky that I've been able to use the difficulties I've had because of the strengths they give me, right? I get hyper-focused at the same time as I'm constantly bouncing between one thing and the next. And that hyper-focus is a superpower. It can also end up being a tragedy. It is a difficult road to ride, but the reason I'm talking about it is because I'm here to ride it with y'all, and we're just trying to figure out the best path to make things that are lovely and share them with people that we love. I hope that was useful. Thank you. Ah, Nostromo patches, I love it.
All right. Has there ever been a build, rather if it was Mythbusters or Tested or just personally even before all that, was there ever a build that logistically you thought you could ever accomplish?
Yeah. I mean, in the summer of 2020, I lost a good friend, and the way I dealt with it was building the Hellboy Samaritan. And I didn't know how to finish it when I started it. Like, I was really clear, I don't know how to do a whole bunch of this, but I know where to start. And it really is like, there's this thing of understanding that as long as I know what the next step is, I keep on going. And I just keep on doing that. And then I get to this part that was formerly a mystery, but I've been following my next step so assiduously that all of a sudden, this landscape is no longer a mystery, but I at least know two things that I can do here. I didn't know one thing. I didn't know that when you're building a firearm like this, you should build the whole back half with all the mechanics in it in two halves so you can get inside that thing. I didn't do that. So my Hellboy Samaritan is ridiculous. Because I had to buy all these super long end mills to get in there and hog out room. I do eventually, there's a second build I want to do soon. Well, whenever I'm doing a build, I always want a specific experience. Like I want it to feel a certain way. And I had held the original Hellboy gun. I wanted that experience, or so I thought, until I finished mine, which was just exact in every way that I wanted it to be, except when I held it, I was like, shoot, I want one in steel now. And I want to see if it can fire. And the best part about it is, if you know firearms at all, the Hellboy bullet is stupid. It's got like this much powder and this much bullet. I swear it might throw like 60 feet. Which is hilarious to me. I'm totally willing to do it. And then I mentioned this on a live stream recently, and a fan sent me all the correct steel to build the Samaritan out of. I'm like, oh man, okay, I guess I gotta do this.
I reload ammunition if you need help.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm gonna be installing plastic caps into the back of these. Yeah, it'll be a fascinating education. And I don't know how it's gonna go. Luckily, screwing up on camera is kind of my brand. Thank you so much for that great question. Thank you. Hello, Zorro. Oh, I'm sorry, the Dread Pyro. My apologies.
So, no doubt that you have 0 unfinished projects right now. Is that correct? So how do you handle when you have an overwhelming amount of unfinished things before you? How do you sort of choose which thing you need to do and how to move forward with it when you feel overwhelmed by the unfinished amount of things you have to do?
Yeah. It's so mood-based. And again, I have a business structure that allows my ADHD to flourish, right? Like, I can be like, today I'm gonna do this, tomorrow I'm gonna do this, actually after lunch I'm gonna do this. It is always, I always try and base it on interest, because once I lean into something, my interest I know is gonna make the content fascinating, right? Like, if my intersection with it is emotional and I want the thing I'm gonna try and strive to get, that's enough. If I'm not feeling that, which happens about a third of the time, then I take a look for a shelf around the shop that needs organizing. And the organizing is like, it's funny, a friend of mine's like, right, you have a whole business model in which organizing for building, but not actually building, is actually something you could do for weeks on end. And I'm like, I know, isn't it great? And the organizing is wonderful because not only do I feel like I've achieved something, but all of a sudden there's a shelf that is much neater. And I have learned one thing this year, which is I randomly built a cabinet for some machine tools and put lights in it. And then I noticed 8 months later that because it had lights in it, I was keeping it really neat. I was like, okay, so now lights go in every cabinet there is. I want to see back to the back of there, and then us can make everything nice. Thank you for the question. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hello.
My question is, has there ever been a cosplay that you had to fix while at the convention or on the fly that went wrong?
Well, so when I last was at, not last, sorry, 2 years ago in Silicon Valley, I was wearing my Iron Man Mark I when the part of the leg that rubs against the inside of my knee worked its way through my jeans and then my skin. Oh, it's happened to so many of you. And it was just slowly scraping so that each time I walked, I could feel it like, oh, that's gonna hurt a lot later. And then I hired my son Thing 2 to be my direct body assistant, right? Like, you're just shadowing me, you've got a walkie, whatever I need, and it was great. And so I radioed and I was like, I need help to get off the floor. And he went and he found me a push cart. So he shows up with a push cart and I step on it and he pushes me off the floor like a janitor. It was the greatest thing. We have great pictures of that. Yeah, man, nothing ever goes according to plan. You know, there's always some part, and it's frequently like, I'll be thinking about a cosplay and I'll be like, this part's gonna be the best part. And that'll be the part that I never get around to. Weird how consistently that happens. Or I show up with my proton pack and my favorite feature, which is the smoking end filter, dies just as I hit the floor. That's fine, it's already on video, everyone's seen it, it's not a big loss, but it feels like that. Like oh shit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, you look fabulous.
It was mentioned earlier, one of my favorite videos to watch of you is your love letter to cosplay. And I was really curious about your motivation to write and deliver that speech, which you even mentioned in the speech was a very personal item for you.
It's a good story, actually. So I had been wanting to speak at TED forever. I had actually pitched TED on a TED Talk back in 2002, before Mythbusters or anything, and they were like, yeah, no. And then they called in 2016, late 2016, and said, can you appear at TED next year? And I was like, absolutely. And I wrote this talk. And the TED people have a procedure. You meet with their editorial team about a month before TED, and you give them your talk. And I gave them this talk, and they were really clear that it wasn't good. And they were right. They were like, it's a relaxed focus, and we're not sure about this front part. It doesn't really make sense. So we think we'd love you to work on it. We can meet up in a couple of weeks. And so I ended up totally rejiggering it and mucking it up and playing around with it. And I get to TED about 3 days before the conference, and now we have a rehearsal. And I do my new version of the talk, and it's still bad. In fact, actually, I've been so nervous about speaking for the TED crowd that when Chris Anderson, who points out to me is like, it's kind of, you've done a lot of self-aggrandizing here. You're talking about your resume, it's like you're sort of singing your own praises and it's a little bit boring. And I went back to my hotel room and I called my wife and she said, you know, have you talked about cosplay on a public forum? And I said, not really. She said, what about that? And then she and I workshopped that talk together, which is actually the first time I've ever wheeled anybody else into my process. She and I workshopped that talk together over about 40 drafts over the next 3 days. And it was a really, really lovely process of sort of, the structure came about pretty quickly, and then how the stories, really it's the trick to a great talk for me is that the transition points make sense. It's not about the story you're telling, it's how you get from that story to this other one. And as long as those transitions feel natural and they move the story along, the talk feels like it has coherence. But those transitions are the hardest part, and they're the last things that fit together. And so what I would do over those 3 days is we would be having phone calls, work on a draft, and then I'd go off and do some stuff, and then come back at lunch, work on another draft, have a phone call. And then at the end of each of the 3 days, I would record the most recent version of the talk. And then the following morning, I would listen to it. And for me, just like any of you, listening to my own voice can be an awful experience. However, and I'm going to curse here for a second, when you listen to yourself talk, you can really hear where you are full of shit. And when I say that, what I mean is where you haven't managed your transitions and you're trying to skate through this narrative, but you really have to earn it. You've got to make the plot points work in a sequence. And we didn't have an end until the night before the talk. I'm getting goosebumps telling you this. The night before the talk, I'm at an event with a couple of artists, and I'm thinking about the cosplay, and I came up with that phrase that I finished the talk with, the costumes are how we recognize each other, and I like ran out to the side, and I called my wife, and she was like, that's it! And I then worked that talk over until I forgot it. I'm very good at memorizing, but I rarely do full deep memorization for a talk because I usually pick it up from my slides. And also, frankly, for stuff like this, I love coming loose and raw and going off the top of my head. And there's a place for that, and then there's a place for doing stuff until you forget it. And I'm up on stage. It's a very intense stage to stand on because Steven Spielberg's over here, Meg Ryan's in there. It's like mind-blowing. And I'm about 2 minutes in, and I think to myself, I'm a little ahead of the material. I can tell I'm rushing just a little bit. And then my brain goes, you always think you're a little ahead of the material 2 minutes in. So I just paused for like, whatever it was, half a second. It doesn't probably even show up in the video as a pause, but for me, I paused for a second. And then I remembered what the next line was, and I just said it. And I wasn't thinking about what the line after that was. And so then each one that came up, it just showed up naturally. I've talked to actors who tell me this is exactly how it should work. And then I came off that stage, and I won't name them, but an absolute A-list, unbelievable actor who's a hero of mine came up afterwards and said, I want to tell you, you really floored me. I've never been comfortable with fan culture. It's always creeped me out. But you helped me understand it. And what they meant really was that they understood in their craft that the shoes and the pants and the weight of the belt all mattered to the performance. And I was explaining that what we're going through is precisely the same sympathetic magic. That the shoes and the pants and the weight of the belt really matter. That we're pouring our bodies into these narratives. And it felt like that talk showed up out of whole cloth. Despite all the work we put into it, it felt like it arrived fully formed. And it's like, I'm so grateful that I got to tell that story. Thank you. I love your glasses.
Thank you. Have you ever struggled with project fatigue, like you're in the middle of something and you just really don't want to go on?
All the time. All the time. I mean, usually I've learned actually, for my whole life, my own shop has been the last thing I got to. I've had to work for a living. Mythbusters was full-time, so when I was doing Mythbusters, my shop was a place I got to about 3 or 4 hours a week, a month. And as such, I treated it like a scarcity model. So every second I could have there, I would take there. And it would lead to some conflicts because I'm like, I don't want to work on this thing anymore, but I don't want to leave this shop. I've learned to leave the shop. I've learned to go home and nap on my couch at home when I'm not feeling it. And that's often given me much more space to come back and tackle the thing the next day. It's no fun to jump into a project where I know everything in front of me is tedium. And also I'm pissed off at this thing because I messed something up yesterday and I'm still ashamed and pissed about it. And by the way, for the kids in the audience, about my slight amount of cursing, just know that when adults curse, it's so cool. There's a lot about adulthood we're not telling you that sucks. But the cursing is one of the best parts. And when children curse around adults, it's just gross. It's gross to see those words coming out of your face. So just don't curse in front of adults. That's my advice. Thank you for that question. Hello.
I have to bend down a little bit, sorry. So I am an engineer and a cosplayer, and multiple, oh, thank you. You can still hear me? Cool. So multiple times throughout my projects, both in cosplay and engineering, I'll just stop and be like, oh shoot, this is not going to work. So what do you do in those moments if you come across those?
Sometimes those are really difficult moments when I realize the whole path that I'm going down is actually just not going to fly. I often get so upset at that point, I pack everything up, and it really worked to pack it up neatly. But I often pack it up for like a week or more, so that I can really think about a new solution. Because it's usually, in cosplay, the engineering and the aesthetics are so integrated and so integral to each other. You can mess up a mechanic and it's going to change how you do the aesthetics for a whole line of things that has a long tail. So frequently it's about me either letting go of my anger enough to tackle it, or letting the anger build enough to tackle it. Both work. But there's also there's a kind of surrender. There's a Buddhist phrase, this is what's happening now. And it is a really important phrase for me in my life about taking on stuff or dealing with things that are terrible. I've raised twins. I've been divorced. I've been through some shit like we all have. And things get really, really difficult. And there's a part of you that can end up taking it personally, emotionally, and you're like, I just want this to stop, which is totally irrational thought. And for me, saying to myself, you know what, this is what's happening right now. You're dealing with, twin poop for another 5 hours, or whatever thing I have to deal with. And that frame, coming into the shop, and in trying to come into the shop with a positivist frame of all right, I'm gonna tackle this thing, it's gonna suck for a whole day, and then it'll be fine, and then it'll be fine by Tuesday. I hope that was useful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna try and say hi over here. Hi guys, I don't mean to ignore you over here. It's just the questions are over here. I'll wander around. Hi.
Hi Adam, I've been watching you solve problems my entire life, and a lot of us have. I just want to peel into that process, because this is a room full of problems. None of us have. So when you're approaching a problem, what's the most important thing that you think of? What's that aspect that you look for?
It is, do I know at least one step to proceed? So, with a new material or a new process, or on Mythbusters, the problem I often had to solve was how to tell a story. How to tell a story about how to tell a story. I think it doesn't like certain words a lot. How to tell a story about a specific engineering or scientific process. And at the beginning, the problem to solve is just a soup of parameters and possible futures, right? It's like, okay, I've got this framework, I've got to work something mechanical into it, this is a servo, it goes there, okay, I know all these things eventually end up living together, but I don't know how, and there's too many variables, like should the eye glue here or should the ear attach here? Should this be one linkage or should I have 2 servos? Am I gonna do it with Raspberry Pi or some other format? And you can be overwhelmed by the number of choices. So what I often do is I look at other people's builds, I make drawings, I work it over in my head, and at a certain point in that process of looking at what other people have done, just making drawings of the problem and making lists of the problem, eventually something ticks in my head is like, oh, well, I don't know how this will get done, but I know the first step is this thing. Like, oh, the first thing is get a whole bunch of 1/4-inch aluminum plate. That is a reasonable first step. And then once I have that, I look for the next thing I know. There's this myth we have as young people in the world that adulthood means you'll know how to do stuff. And nothing could be farther from the truth. Yeah. What I find really funny at this age is noticing, I watch young people and I see them making mistakes and I'm not stopping them. You all just have to work that out on your own. And I realized, oh my God, all the adults could watch me making mistakes and they weren't going to tell me. No, we're not going to tell you. What was I saying? So you think that it's going to be about like this perfect set of knowledge to attack a problem, and the answer is no. Just like life, you're going to know one thing, maybe 2 at a time that you could proceed towards. And then each time you do that, you're actually getting a little bit of a better grip on the handle of it. I think of the handle as a perfect metaphor for a project. And once you have that handle, you can start to shake it, and all these other solutions in the project itself comes out of that shaking. There's my metaphor.
Excellent.
Thank you. Lefty loosey, righty tighty.
All right. Okay, so as a maker, is there a specific fiddly sort of technique that you love to do, even if it's very finicky and maybe the actual project you're working on doesn't actually call for it? Even though it's really finicky, it takes time, you still want to include it?
Oh, I'm sure there is. I mean, there are absolutely processes that just give me pleasure to do. I mean, like, I do all sorts of stuff that I don't need to machine. You know, and I could just go get an L bracket, but I'd rather use the machine tools to make this ridiculous L bracket. And I'm very forgiving about that kind of thing. I'm really there. I've always said that every shop is an externalization of a philosophy about how to work. What I've only come to just realize is that my shop's philosophy is the lowest possible threshold to the flow state. And for me, when I'm doing something that's tedious and exhausting, but it's something I love, that I'm in my happy place, man. That's what I'm there to do. And like I'm sitting there, like I've got some stuff drying on the primer, I've got some stuff baking, and I've got some stuff that I'm sanding, and I'm kind of moving between all three. And like I can't see how this is going to end up. It's hours and hours of work ahead of me. But like that rhythm feels really, really beautiful. And so that's why I keep purchasing extra sets of tools for each tool that I have, so I don't have to back up and walk across literally that. But even that throws me out. So yeah, I'm a big believer in following the process that feels right. It might not necessarily be the right one for the thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, Derek Draven. This mic stand. Someone's going to cosplay as this mic stand next year. Hello.
Have you seen Picard season 3? And if you have, what are your thoughts on it?
I have not seen Picard season 3. I am very behind in a lot of my television watching. I apologize.
You're gonna cry at the end.
I always knew that. Is that like that?
I'm just gonna start.
That's totally appropriate in your costume. Thank you so much, man. You look beautiful. All right, we have 2 minutes left, and we've got, I think we can try and speed run through everyone. Let's try and do it.
I think that we need stories and we need people doing remarkable things. I think that pointing to the moon landing is a great example of something incredibly inspiring. However, I also see that it's a little bit tone deaf, and I'm a little bit like, I find a little bit of disgust in spending that much money on something when there are much more tangible things. And so I guess as a storyteller and a creative, how do you deal with finding meaning in making things that inspire people, well, that need to be told, while also like dealing with like, oh, there are also like very tangible things that can be done.
So first of all, the problem with spending on the moon landing versus spending on stuff back home is that it's not a zero-sum game. We solved world hunger a long time ago. The reason there's still hungry people is because of late-stage capitalism. I have struggled with my weird hobbies of replication. And I have at times wondered what I am contributing to the world. And then I come to places like this and I talk to you guys. I was at MIT on Monday, and I was mobbed in a way that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was really, really lovely. And I realized I agree with you. We do need stories. One of the stories we need is stories about people going and following something they're curious about and coming to remarkable conclusions, because humans are amazing at that. And I realize those are the stories that I'm telling, that I'm highlighting here. In my own way, on my own wavelength, I'm getting to do that. And I like to think of my job as a permission machine. I think humans work best when they follow those weird things in their head they can't ignore. This is a self-selected group of geniuses at this, right? Like, putting on movie costumes is totally weird. And yet, someone asked me, how do I defend it to my grandmother? And I was like, tell your grandmother that you know she has a piece of clothing that feels great to wear. And just tell her that you took it professional. And that's it. And there's real lessons in there. I find the most simpatico people are the most surprising aspect of, well, now it's blanking. The most surprising aspect of making Mythbusters was when Jamie and I and the other hosts would find scientists and engineers treating us like peers. Because it is about a mindset of discovery and curiosity. And I'm delighted to keep telling those stories about discovery and curiosity and the emotionality that's involved in those things. I'm sorry I didn't get to your guys' questions, but thank you so much for your patience. And thank you guys so much for these questions. They're all extremely involved. I love you, Minneapolis. I'll see you guys next time. Yeah. You guys, guess what? He can still hear you right now. One more time, a huge round of applause. I can listen to him talk all day long. It's so fun. All right, guys, thank you so much for giving. Come back here.